Welcome to the Zen Studies Podcast. I'm Domyo Burke. Thanks to new supporting members of the podcast, Kathleen from Lake Tomahawk, Wisconsin, Tony from San Diego, California, Stephen or Stefan from LaBelle, Florida, Vida from Toronto, Canada, and Daniel from Auburn, California. Thanks so much, all of you. Do you happen to be an app designer? I'd love to have an app for the Zen Studies podcast so you could easily browse and search my episodes to find what you want using a smartphone. The podcast website is responsive to mobile use, but that's still no substitute for an app. Plus, more people would find the podcast through the app. So, if you're willing to make one for me for a reasonable cost, please contact me via zenstudiespodcast.com. So, on to today's topic, the power of equanimity. Equanimity is a powerful state of being that not only reduces our stress and suffering, but also enables us to respond effectively. But in our efforts to achieve some measure of equanimity, we may end up stuck in the tentative calm of denial or in the coldness of indifference. And true equanimity is clear-eyed, undefended, compassionate, and inclusive. But how do we cultivate it? I explore the virtue of equanimity from a Buddhist perspective. The virtue of equanimity in the oldest Buddhist teachings. In the teachings of the Buddha, the virtue of equanimity is considered very important and figures in several important lists. It's one of the 4 sublime social attitudes, or Brahmaviharas, one of the 7 factors of awakening, and one of the 10 perfections, or paramitas. Successful contemplative practice is described by the Buddha as, quote, having overcome covetousness and grief concerning the world, end quote. And references for any of the quotations that I make can be found on the podcast website, including sources. The Buddha himself is described as the epitome of equanimity. In the Pali Canon Sakalika Sutta, it says, quote, now at that time, the Buddha's foot had been pierced by a stone sliver. Excruciating were the bodily feelings that developed within him. Painful, fierce, sharp, racking, repellent, disagreeable. But he endured them, mindful, alert, and unperturbed. Having had his outer robe folded in 4 and laid out, he lay down on his right side in the lion's posture, with one foot placed on top of the other, mindful and alert. End quote. The Buddha also, according to the stories, faced alarming circumstances with equanimity. According to another sutta, someone who resented him arranged to have a wild elephant given wine and then released as the Buddha was going on his alms rounds with his disciple Ananda. The sutta says, quote, standing close by the exalted one and seeing the intoxicated elephant head towards them, Ananda was so scared out of his wits that he stepped behind the Tathagata. That elephant, he warned the exalted one, is wicked and violent, impetuous and given to creating havoc. It must by all means be avoided. End quote. Rather than running, though, the Buddha calmly stood and faced the elephant and ended up placating it. Now, true, the sutta says this was by using his supernatural powers, but the image of the Buddha standing still in the face of a rampaging elephant is nonetheless compelling. The Buddha's foremost disciples are also described as having, quote, overcome their passion, end quote. For example, a group of monks was out of town when the Buddha died. Someone met them on the road and told them that the Buddha had passed away 7 days earlier. The Mahaparinibbana Sutta says, quote, "With that, some of the monks present who were not without passion wept, uplifting their arms. As if their feet were cut out from under them, they fell down and rolled back and forth, crying, 'All too soon is the Blessed One totally unbound. All too soon is the one well gone totally unbound. All too soon the one with eyes has disappeared from the world.' But those monks who were free from passion acquiesced, mindful and alert, saying, 'Fabrications are inconstant. What else is there to expect?'" End quote. The challenge of equanimity. A dictionary definition of equanimity is mental or emotional stability or composure, especially under tension or strain. Synonyms include calmness, equilibrium, self-possession, serenity, and even-mindedness. Contrast this to how we often feel when faced with difficulty. Worried, stressed, anxious, fearful, reactive, angry, or resentful. Maybe we're experiencing conflict in our relationships, the torment of injustice, or the weight of great responsibility. We might be witnessing scary or heartbreaking things happening in our family, community, country, or global society. It can be extremely challenging to remain calm when we see cause for concern about our well-being or that of our loved ones, or when something we care about seems threatened. Do we really want to feel equanimity when facing challenges? Ask yourself this question and reflect honestly on it. I mean, of course, we'd like to be seen as composed. We'd like to be calm enough to act effectively. We'd like an end to our stress or angst. But do we really want to give up our emotional response to things? Not usually. We usually think our anger or anxiety or fear are justified or necessary. After all, don't we need these emotions to keep us vigilant and motivate us to take the required action? In the case of grief, perhaps we are unwilling to let it go, even after a long time, because it seems to be the only thing connecting us to who or what we have lost. When we're exhausted by our emotions and need a break from them, it can be tempting to slip into denial of some kind. Unable to maintain equanimity while facing our problems, the only alternative often seems to be ignoring them as best we can. Whether we're avoiding the news, suppressing our thoughts and feelings, or numbing out on intoxicants, the relative calm we feel is very conditional. Even if we manage to be happy, the causes of stress and sadness lurk at the edges of our consciousness. To maintain this state, we have to close ourselves off to part of reality and compromise our experience of life and our participation in it. Alternatively, we may seek equanimity by trying to change our conditions. While it's essential that we take care of our lives and act for good in the world, have we convinced ourselves that stable composure and even-mindedness will elude us until all of our problems are solved? If so, we're unlikely to experience much equanimity in our lifetimes. The dead end of indifference. Equanimity is not the conditional calmness of denial, so what is it? First, it's important to realize that the term equanimity is meaningless unless it's happening in the context of some kind of conditional turbulence or trouble. The dictionary definition quoted earlier says equanimity is composure, especially under tension or strain. But I think the word especially could be omitted. Equanimity isn't the peace you feel when everything's great. It's how you can, theoretically at least, respond to stress and pain. In the presence of conditional turbulence, what is an equanimous response? Most of us, I think, assume it means not feeling anything or not caring. In other words, we imagine equanimity is indifference. We imagine that when somebody cuts us off in traffic and we almost have a collision, no fear or anger would arise in us, as if we have no concern for our own survival. Or that if we lose a loved one, we would feel no sadness, as if the person made no difference in our life. Or that when we watch political or environmental developments that may bring great devastation and suffering, we would feel no concern, as if we don't love this world or worry about our grandchildren. That when we're racked with pain, it wouldn't register in our experience any differently than pleasant or neutral sensations, as if we don't have a human body. When we would like greater equanimity, but imagine it to be dependent on indifference, we either dissociate from our life or create internal conflict with our own emotions. And both responses are a kind of internal violence. When we dissociate, we end up feeling disconnected from our thoughts and feelings, memories, and experiences. And this disconnect can range from mild to severe. If you're troubled by emotions, it may sound great to be able to disconnect from them, but dissociation isn't a healthy long-term way to manage our emotions. It's like our emotional responses remain latent while we dissociate or suppress them, building up until we're vulnerable and then bursting out all at once. Dissociation also fragments our internal experience and limits our emotional range. When, for better or worse, we're unable to disconnect from or suppress our emotions, we may end up doing battle with them. We identify with some kind of superego who aims to maintain emotional control. This executive I experiences continual frustration and disappointment, even anger or disgust, at the aspects of ourselves that flare up in anger and stew in jealousy or self-pity, sink into depression or despair, get carried away by lust or greed, or become paralyzed by anxiety or fear. Techniques for emotional regulation can help our lives feel more manageable, and practice can help us let go of many responses that are based on delusions and attachments, but still the emotional responses arise. And no amount of telling ourselves, I shouldn't feel this way, seems to prevent this. In fact, some of our emotional responses end up feeling even more intractable the more we try to stop them, making equanimity, at least when we're facing difficulty, which is the only time it matters, seem permanently elusive. The ideal of the unperturbable Buddha. What if equanimity isn't about indifference, that is, not feeling or caring, but something else entirely? Let's look back at the Sakalika Sutta, which described the Buddha's pain after having gotten a stone sliver in his foot, something which, in the age before antibiotics, would likely have been infected. The sutta says, excruciating were the bodily feelings that developed within him, painful, fierce, sharp, racking, repellent, disagreeable, but he endured them mindful, alert, and unperturbed. Note that the sutta does not say that the Buddha felt no pain. In fact, it says the feelings were repellent and disagreeable. In other words, at a certain level, the Buddha's experience was no different than yours or mine would have been if we were in terrible pain. And yet he endured it, remaining mindful, alert, and unperturbed. He didn't seek refuge, as I probably would, in substances that would dull his senses or activities that would distract him. He faced the entire experience with equanimity. This is impressive and worth examining. The Sakalika Sutta continues, saying that Mara came by to taunt the Buddha. And Mara is the mythological god of the desire realm who continually tries to foil the Buddha so beings won't be able to escape his clutches. Mara says, quote, "Are you lying there in a stupor or drunk on poetry? Are your goals so very few? All alone in a secluded lodging, what is this dreamer, this sleepy face?" End quote. In other words, Mara says, is your calm in the face of your injury due to denial, distraction, numbness, or indifference? Have you managed to dissociate from your experience, leaving you cut off from the world? Are you resting in oblivion? The Buddha responds to Mara, quote, "I lie here not in a stupor nor drunk on poetry. My goal attained, I am sorrow-free. All alone in a secluded lodging, I lie down with sympathy for all beings. I'm not awake with worry, nor afraid to sleep. Days and nights don't oppress me. I see no threat of decline in any world at all. That's why I sleep with sympathy for all beings." End quote. Despite the excruciating pain he was experiencing, the Buddha was lying there with his heart and awareness wide open. He didn't allow his difficulty to consume all his attention, but maintained care and concern for all beings. He wasn't maintaining alertness out of worry, that is, out of an effort to manage his pain or, say, prove his spiritual prowess, but because this painful moment was not less worthy of mindfulness than a pleasant one. He was not afraid to sleep or surrender conscious control. The changing conditions of day and night, light and darkness, pain and ease, joy and sorrow didn't oppress him, as he didn't increase his suffering by longing for whatever was not his current experience. And as I read this, I just imagine experiencing lots of physical pain during a long, dark night. Because the Buddha didn't cling to a fixed idea of how the world should be, he was untroubled by the thought of its decline. And all these aspects of the Buddha's equanimity resulted not in a being who was centered only on minimizing his own pain, but in a being who felt sympathy for all beings, even in sleep. Cultivating our own equanimity. The Buddha is an ideal, And few people will ever attain his level of equanimity, but such an ideal can still be very helpful to us. It gives us a direction to go. How can we be more like this? Over time, our practice usually gives us more equanimity. It does this primarily by giving us a larger perspective, or I should say, larger perspectives. Larger is a relative word. And the beautiful thing is that we can access just a little bit of equanimity every time we're able to broaden our perspective just a little bit. When we start meditating and practicing mindfulness, we notice our thoughts and feelings come and go. Our perspective broadens from the content of our minds to the space through which the content moves. Less identified with our emotional and mental experiences, we are often less upset by them. When we start relating the Dharma teachings to our lives, we learn to recognize the arising of dukkha, stress or suffering, and what causes it. Our perspective broadens from an effort to manage our individual life to applying age-old wisdom to it, because after all, we're not so different from the Buddhas and ancestors. We can let go of the guilt and shame and trust the practice. When we start to wake up to reality with a capital R, we realize there's a whole universe in a single drop of water, and the ineffable can't be destroyed. Our perspective broadens from the sorrows of the world to the boundless realm of the Dharma. While our heart still breaks for the suffering of living beings, and we toil endlessly to save them, we are free from existential despair. However, no matter how broad a perspective we have awakened to, equanimity isn't something we attain and keep. It's a response to conditional turbulence in this moment, then this moment, then this moment. Like physical balance, it's a response that manifests as we move and live. This is why we can have equanimity, then lose it, then gain it again. The loss isn't a sin or a sign of failure, it's just part of the process. All we can do is recover as quickly as we can. Equanimity is also not about holding a comforting set of beliefs. All my talk about broadening our perspective may seem to suggest that if we're able to cultivate the right kind of understanding, we won't be upset by anything. And it's true that a positive outlook on life may give us some equanimity. But the efficacy of our outlook isn't in the philosophy of it, but in how it changes the way we perceive things in this moment. Equanimity isn't to be found in a satisfying set of predetermined explanations and answers to life's problems, but in our fully embodied response right here, right now. It's not about the future or the past or intellectual understanding. If you're anything like me, though, you harbor a tiny hope that the equanimity of the sages is a result of their having figured everything out. That the Buddha would feel calm in the face of the climate crisis, for example, because he would be able to foresee how everything will work out okay in the end, or at least how there's no reason to be upset if it doesn't. It's tough to give up this hope, but real equanimity is more profound than feeling confident everything is going to work out the way we want it to. The power of equanimity. Real, functional, in-the-moment equanimity isn't rational. Instead, it's a calm, centered way of being with the conditional turbulence we're facing. Because That's the wisest, most compassionate, and most effective way to be. We entirely let go of telling ourselves stories about what's happening and let go of trying to anticipate what's going to happen next. Instead, allowing ourselves to be fully embodied in our direct experience. This isn't denial. We don't shrink away from the conditional turbulence, but remain alert and present within it. This isn't indifference, because we aren't clinging to an agenda of avoiding pain or emotional turmoil. In equanimity, we reject nothing in the sense of trying to exclude it from our reality. Equanimity is showing up wholeheartedly in the messiness of life with fierce determination to do what's needed and willingness not to know ahead of time what those needs might be or how we might respond. It means surrendering our ego-based sense of control in favor of trust in interdependence. Equanimity isn't powerful in and of itself, except perhaps as a source of inspiration and strength for others, but it allows something powerful to move through us. It takes time to build trust in this process. Our small mind jumps forward to interfere out of habit. But eventually, we recognize that the experience of equanimity is far preferable to emotional reactivity. And when we can act with some measure of equanimity, the results are usually much better than otherwise. Now, to avoid turning even this idea of equanimity into a source of struggle in our practice, we need to remember that our emotional responses are part of the conditional turbulence we aim to face wholeheartedly. Now, maybe in some sense, it's ideal if some difficulty doesn't arouse any anger or anxiety or distress in us. But if it does, we face our emotional reactivity in a calm, centered way because that's the wisest, most compassionate, and most effective way to be. There's no use in getting upset about getting upset. Over time and practice, we learn to trust that the practice will work on us. And we naturally wish to be without emotional distress and reactivity, but wishing is pointless. Life as a human being comes with emotions, and if we really think about it, we don't want it to be any other way. Finally, equanimity has nothing to do with passivity. We may imagine that if we experience real equanimity, we won't care about protecting or changing or taking responsibility or improving anything, because we'll no longer be emotionally distressed about all of it. Fortunately, the motivation for wise and compassionate action comes from a much deeper place than emotional distress. Equanimity helps us stay strong and enables effective action. I think of the motto, "Keep calm and carry on," meant for motivational posters in the area of England that was being bombed daily in World War II. The posters were never widely distributed, but the motto reflects a real aspect of the character of people who survived and took care of each other during the bombing. In such a setting, to whatever extent you were able to keep calm and carry on, helped you survive and take care of others. Rather than such equanimity being a passive or resigned way to be, it was defiant. In this time, when so much in the world seems headed in dangerous directions, I hope you will explore with me real equanimity. That is it for today. I will be back soon with another episode. Thanks for tuning in.